the International Conference on Agriculture and Forestry.
The presentations. So I'm a research scientist working in the French National Institute of Agricultural Research. It's a research system very similar to USDA or ICR of India. We have several laboratories located throughout the coterminous France as well as in the Antilles and Indian Ocean. So I'm trained as an environmental physicist and my interest lies in better understanding the biogeochemical cycles, terrestrial biogeochemical cycles. That's a critical part of the climate change issue. So this is a one of the most popular geophysical curve of the 21st century. This figure shows the increasing CO2 concentration recorded at Mauna Loa, Hawaii. What's quite interesting here, I mean, we all know that it is increasing at an exponential rate. But what is very interesting here is the interannual variability. Within a given year, we have ups and downs. So this is quite important because this reflects the amount of carbon which is released from the biosphere to the atmosphere by the process of vegetation has an impact on this fluxes of carbon between the atmosphere and biosphere, and most of the vegetation is concentrated on the northern hemisphere. So that's why we have a higher curve in the boreal summertime or the springtime, followed by a dip in the autumn season in the northern hemisphere. So what I want to stress here is that the vegetated land surfaces has a critical role in controlling the carbon cycle of the earth, but this is not a very simple question because the carbon cycle is or the functioning of the plant for regulating the carbon cycle is greatly controlled by other cycles such as the water cycle, nitrogen cycle, and they all act in a highly complex and integrated manner, and we need to better understand this complexity. I have chosen a generic term which could explain all this complexity: hydrology, nitrogen cycling, and land surface exchange of heat and mass, with a term called terrestrial ecohydrology. So the terrestrial ecohydrology processes are not quite easy to understand because it is highly scale dependent. So some of the main three components of this terrestrial ecohydrological process are the soil, plant, and atmosphere. The complexity of each of these entities greatly varies across the scales. For example, at the scale of a soil core, the fundamental physical processes that affects hydrology or biogeochemical process are quite different from another scale. For example, the scale profile, a soil profile, and maybe at the scale of the planet, the complexity is quite different. So the same case with plant as well as the atmosphere. For example, at the very fine boundary layer, complex physical turbulent processes can affect the functioning of the energy and the fluxes of energy and mass. But at the scale of the continent or the global scale, the process can be quite different, and the importance of each process can vary at different scale. But across the scale, when we move across the scale, what we can identify is that there is a decreasing complexity of the process itself, but there is an increasing integration between the soil, plant, and atmosphere. So in order to understand this complexity of the global carbon cycle or the global biogeochemical processes, we need to integrate techniques of remote sensing, which can, with the recent developments in sensor technologies, we can go from centimeter scale, decametric scale, up to kilometric scale resolutions. Then we can have integrated modeling. We can do modeling at the molecular scale or watershed scale landscape scale or even at continental scale. We can also have measurements of these biogeochemical processes. We can have, for example, plot level measurements, which may be at the scale of 50 centimeter or 100 centimeter. We can go ecosystem scale measurements using micrometeorologic techniques, or at the global scale using aircraft sampling and tall towers at above the boundary layer of the atmosphere. So what I want to stress here is that we need to have an integrated approach of modeling, measurements, and remote sensing. I mean, remote sensing is one type of Earth observation. It's like a measurement, but I keep it separate because what I want to stress here is that we need to have an integrated approach to understand the carbon cycle and the climate. So in this spirit, we developed a modeling exercise to develop strategies to understand the complexity of the biogeochemical cycle in the terrestrial biogeochemical cycles. So this model is spatially explicit. It is a daily time step model. It is a physics-based model. It's not fully empirical. That means it need not be parameterized every time. So because it's physics-based model, we can address feedback mechanisms. For example, there could be processes which can be synergistic, randomistic. When the climate change, management scenarios change, if we introduce empiricism in our predictive approaches, we may end up in uncertainty. So we need to have physics-based models. So another unique feature about this is that it has a highly coupling between the carbon cycle, water cycle, and the nitrogen cycle, which is not very common in the modeling world. So fundamentally, the canopy is this is an analogy we follow. The physiology of a canopy can be governed by the availability of light and water, and the mechanism by which the carbon or water or energy exchanges between the biosphere and the atmosphere is through the stomata, and we need to have a clear description of the stomatal functioning to understand the carbon fluxes. So the photosynthesis is modeled using a very well-known, very well established model called the Farquhar model, which is a biochemical model for C3 plants, and the photosynthesis is defined as a minimum of Rubisco-limited and light-limited photosynthesis. So this study, I mean this work, my work has been very much involved with the FluxNet. FluxNet is a global initiative of monitoring various terrestrial ecosystems using micrometeorologic techniques. We use a technique called eddy covariance, where we measure the fluxes of mass and energy in natural ecosystems as well as diverse ecosystems. I was involved in the FluxNet Canada, to be specific, and I worked in a high latitude boreal ecosystem there in the province of Quebec. And what we wanted to understand was how ecohydrological indicators vary in space and time in this boreal ecosystem, and what are the mechanisms of what are the hydrological controls that governs ecophysiology and biogeochemical process. What are the potential uncertainties that can be there if we don't include hydrology in these models, in these modeling exercises. Boreal ecosystems were chosen because it is considered to be a significant terrestrial carbon sink, and with the global climate change, we know that high latitude and high altitude ecosystems are the most prone ecosystems, and they can respond in an unpredictable manner, and that's why we need to work on boreal ecosystems. So some of the data sets which go into this modeling platform is leaf area index, which is an index that quantifies the abundance of leaf on a given land surface. That is important because leaves are the primary organs where carbon is fixed from the solar energy. And digital elevation model is another data which gives us information, the geomorphological nature of the land surface, which can control the land surface fluxes of water. Land cover is another important data. So there are several data sets that go to this model. So some of the simulations are shown here. It's a simulation of the water table, which is the phreatic zone water dynamics. So we can see that the model does a pretty reasonable job in predicting the measured water table dynamics. So also the Weddell zone water table, which is a volumetric moisture content, is shown here. So in boreal ecosystem, there are unique processes that are not well defined in soil physics literature. That is, for example, preferential water fluxes. Water does not obey the classical physics, so water can flow through macropores or preferential ways through the soil. Very gentle topography, so conventional engineering techniques for which we use to model land surface hydrology does not apply very well. So snow is another very important factor because snow melt can contribute substantially to the annual water balance. So we included various strategies to model these things, and we were able to successfully model different components of the water flux. The figure here shows the simulation of the evapotranspiration, which is, again, evapotranspiration can be considered as a mass flux or energy flux, because if you consider evapotranspiration as a latent heat flux. Anyway, the model is able to predict the measured evapotranspiration. Now GPP, that is the gross primary productivity, is the ecosystem scale photosynthesis. This is shown here. The model captures very well the dynamics of photosynthesis. We can see that aspen forests are highly productive than the black spruce forest, which is a high latitude. I mean, black spruce is very well distributed in high latitude northern Canadian ecosystems. No. So I just want to show you the importance of hydrothermal modeling. For example, the snow is an important component in boreal ecosystems. We can see that the snow, whenever there is snow here, where is it? When the land surface is covered by snow, the soil temperature is not very low. At this time of the year, the air temperature can be as low as minus 40 degrees centigrade or minus 35 degrees centigrade. But you can see at the same time, the soil temperature is quite high, like 2 degrees or 0 or 2 degrees. So this is a very important thing in boreal ecosystems, because microbial respiration is still active in winter time, and the importance of modeling snow is quite important to accurately model carbon fluxes in high latitude boreal ecosystem. So I just want to show another example of how much hydrology is critical to model carbon cycle. So this is another slide that shows the simulation of net ecosystem exchange or net ecosystem productivity, which is the real indicator of the carbon sequestration. The model performs reasonably but there are some uncertainties in winter time, maybe because of the snow ablation and other problems. Now, when we got some confidence in the model, we did some numerical experiments by changing the way in which we conceptualize hydrology, and we developed 3 ways of numerical experiments. And for example, the classical way which the GCMs do hydrological modeling, or the other one was remote sensing based hydrological modeling. Anyway, what we showed is that simplified hydrological modeling will create tremendous errors in the simulation of carbon cycle. So when we came to when I shifted to France, the situation was quite different, and there were more complexity. That we were not working with pristine ecosystems anywhere. There was substantial amount of managed forestry there. Forest is cultivated with crop for timber production. So there are challenges like how management systems will contribute to the carbon cycle and other things. So we improved the model, and we incorporated new things like agroecosystems. It means there are photosynthetic mechanisms can be different, like C4 mechanisms is inherent to maize crop, for example. We incorporated processes for nitrogen fertilizer transmission. For example, urea, how it will change when which is applied to the soil and how that can contribute to the carbon cycle. Biotic stresses like pest and disease, all this were incorporated. So we applied this to French system, French situation, and some of the challenges where we faced are crop rotation is a very important, very unique characteristic feature in agroecosystems, which is not present in pristine ecosystems. So we need information on crop rotation, which can change in space and time. And there is another challenge is irrigation. Irrigation water is not coming from the natural water, it's coming from deep aquifer. So we need, even when global climate modeling community does not accurately know and accurately represent irrigation dynamics. So these things were incorporated. I skipped these things. So some of the success stories were we were able to simulate the photosynthesis and evapotranspiration and many other processes in the Lens de Gascon region of France, which is shown here. Some of the sensitivity studies are shown here, which shows that when nitrogen percentage in the plant changes with the stomatal conductance. Stomatal conductance is a proxy for water stress. The photosynthesis increases synergistically. Similarly, leaf-area index is a very important parameter. Errors in the leaf-area index can create substantial amount of errors in the simulation of photosynthesis. So I just want to give you an idea of how we map leaf-area index at high spatial resolution and at a higher accuracy here. So we make an empirical algorithm with field measurements, and then we invert this algorithm on remotely sensed data, multi-temporal remote sensing data, and then that's how we develop high resolution, high accuracy leaf-area index maps. In a conclusion, what I want to say is that unrealistic hydrological representations create serious errors in our understanding of biogeochemical process of the terrestrial ecosystems. In boreal settings, ecological models that abstract hydrological terms biased estimates. Hence, water, carbon, and nitrogen should be tightly coupled within models. The BETS terrain lab is an example of such an approach. We have developed, I have not talked about the canopy radiative transfer mechanism in detail, but leaf-area index and the complexity of how the canopy architecture is defined in these models can have a big impact on the photosynthesis. A new model is called STEPS is being created by modifying the previous model and account for unique process in agroecosystems. And this could serve as a platform for pedagogic purposes, because if we have an interface and students can play with it and do some numerical experiments, and it may also can be useful for policy or for decision support systems, etc. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I would like to acknowledge a lot of people who have indirectly and directly helped me to do this work.